Okay, Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time for a call today. This is Daniel Baran. He's with Highland Property in Sydney, Australia. The purpose of the call today is to learn about Daniel, to learn about Sydney, to learn about Australia, and then to understand what it's like to buy or sell a property there, and also to understand the unique nature of selling real estate there. So we'll talk about how it operates, what the commission structures are like, who represents who, just the various differences of that. So I want to start by thanking you, Daniel, for taking the time. It's early your time. It is in the afternoon, my time, Sunday. We actually had a misunderstanding because I thought I was doing this call on Monday. He thought he was doing Monday, which is his Monday, but we were able to work it out. So Daniel, thank
We're
you.
here. We're here. My pleasure.
Yes. But if you would, Daniel, please let me and the viewers know who you are, what your background is, whether you've been in Australia your whole life, in Sydney, education, work history, what led you into real estate, your current role, things like that.
Sure. So obviously my name's Daniel Baran, and thank you for inviting me in your Zoom meeting. I really appreciate it. So how I started this business was quite unusual. I'm a son of an electrician. My dad passed away some time ago, but I used to help him do electrical work as a young guy. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I was a horrible electrician, didn't know what I was doing, but I had a great passion, always looking around people's houses, and some of the houses my father did were just amazing. And I remember my father saying, "Where are you?" And I was looking around the properties, looking at the view, and I think my father saw that I wasn't going to make it as an electrician. And we were working for a very big time agent back then in the early 80s. And he got me a job as a property manager, which I was hopeless at. That was like the leasing part of the business and looking after tenants and that sort of stuff, which I absolutely hated. But I loved engaging with people on houses to sell. And I remember I started real estate when interest rates were 18%. And that was a complete, eye-opener for me, where you would do open inspections and you'd have probably 10 properties open and no one came through. So that was a great start for me.
Around what year was that?
I think it was in the 80s.
Late 80s, right.
So yeah. But obviously things got better after that, and I just loved it. Just loved being in property, loved dealing with people. And if you do things really right, there's some great earnings in the business, There's two ways you can be an agent. You can do it the right way, which is being a serviced agent, looking after your client, giving the great service, knowing your craft, or you can be these other guys which, are in that industry where they just try to cut corners. And you can't be like that. You won't survive. You know what I mean? Some guys do it, but that's not the way I do things. Hence, I've been doing it for 40 years already.
Wow.
So, yeah. So basically, being an agent in Sydney, it's probably one of the toughest gigs. I mean, I'm sure it's like in your area, and see a lot of your shows out there. It's probably the most highly competitive business, I think, in Australia, because there's probably 100 agents in our street. You know what I mean? We actually have a small amount of stock we can all try and list, and we're in very uncertain times at the moment. So you really do to know your craft.
So tell me a little bit about so you've been in the business 40 years, obviously.
Yeah.
I assume you're an agent under the brokerage. Is that how it works there?
Yeah. So I'm termed as an independent contractor, which means I have my own business and I plug into the Highland business. But you still have the rules and regulations, and you've got to work in their culture, which I think is very important. And so Highland's like the big mothership, and we just connect in and use all their resources. And they've got high levels of training, which I think is really good. They do look after their people. I mean, just the other day I got taken to a beautiful restaurant, which they look after their teams, and their people, and they do reward people who do the right thing. And not necessarily if you're the biggest salesperson, they're very high on culture, ethics, and I think that's something that is lost in a lot of companies, I think, everywhere at the moment. Everyone's chasing the dollar. The dollars will come if you do the right thing with people, customers, and obviously your colleagues as well.
So is it just you as an individual, or do you have a team?
I do have a team. I've got Brendan, who's not here yet, and Liana does all my social media stuff, which is pretty cool. But also we work, it's actually, somebody said the other day, we work like a wolf pack. We're not just individual businesses. I mean, we are technically, but we do work together. So if I was to list your home, we're not competing with each other. We work as a team. Interesting enough, there's a lot of businesses out there where there's individual businesses and they compete with each other, and they may bring the same vendor to competing for the business. That won't happen here. So if I list your property, I'll what we call a term a caravan. We bring all our salespeople through your home. Everybody is going to help me to try and find you and secure the best buyer possible. And cross-selling is quite amazing because there's about 5 offices with us. And it happens every day that I'll go into a property and they go, oh, I know Laura from Cronulla, and Cronulla's so far away, but there's this sort of network which actually helps us at the end of the day.
Well, I want to get into a little bit about the structure of how it works when you buy and sell. But I guess before we do that, tell me a little bit about Australia and Sydney, and what makes Australia home for you, and what makes Sydney home for you. And how does that compare to some of the other major cities and regions of the country? And I know that each region, from what I understand, has their own their own local governments and somewhat their own rules. But maybe you can shed some light on that as somebody is looking into the country that may not know anything about it, but may want to visit or purchase property.
Look, you know what? The main thing that comes to mind, and we have a lot of people from China, Indonesia, Malaysia, but mainly China, that are coming here. And I think it's because of safety, not pointing fingers in any other country, but, this country, we don't have any guns in this country, and I don't want to bring that up, but I've spoken to a couple of American guys who I'm quite close with, and they say they find it really unusual. We don't have a gun policy. So we don't have guns. There's no gun policy. We don't have the population density. Like, I just know that if you look at India or China, or perhaps even in America, where they've got towns, New York maybe, perhaps there's just so many people. And I think with Australia, we don't have a big population. You know what I mean? I speak to a lot of Chinese people, and they say to me, we just love your country because you can walk around, you can be by yourself. They have suburbs where there's 10 million people in a suburb. It's just, I couldn't even understand that, and being in Sydney, New South Wales, we've got a great mix of people, and we have great culture. We've got incredible beaches and scenery and parks, and we're kind of like a country town with a city. That's how I see it. And we've got the most beautiful harbors in the world. And you talk to anybody, even from Americans come to our country, they're blown away. They are absolutely blown away. They love our country. They love the fact that this Harbour Bridge, which is behind you, is probably one of the biggest iconic structures. In fact, people pay millions to have an opera house, bridge, and city view. If you got that, you've made it apparently in our country, and that's a big symbol to have. And I think the overseas market love that. But, obviously there's other beautiful states like Melbourne, Victoria. But I think Sydney, New South Wales is probably the pick at the moment if you look on the global platform.
So,
and when you talk about government, sorry, we don't like to talk about too much of our governments. I think at the moment we're going through a lot of silly decisions in our government. I'm sure you have the same too, but governments can make really bad decisions financially, socially, but it's always been the same with us. There's always something going on politically that can change the whole framework of how we do business, which is at the moment is our interest rates, which have gone through the roof.
So what do you think makes well, there's actually a lot in what you just said that's of interest to me to talk about. But what do you think? Well, first of all, I guess, were you born and raised in Sydney? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So I
And
was
you
born
chose,
in Bondi.
okay, and you've chosen to stay there because you feel like it's the most desirable place to live in the country, or it just makes sense because you've been there, et cetera, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I come from a family, we all kind of stick together. My brother's a very big time barrister. As I said, I lost our dad some time ago. So we look after mum. And I just don't think I'm ready to make that move. I mean, I always have these ideas. I like to, try different things, but I now I'm a late father as well. I've got a little girl who's 6. So I think it's important she stays where she is in her little school. And the thing is, with agents today, you know, it's very hard for an agent to go from one suburb to another suburb and to go from one country to another country. It's about having all your connections. You know what I mean? I mean, everyone knows me here in this, in the Rose Bay, Dover Heights, Vaucluse. That's my little patch that I work with. And to start that again in another state would be crazy, I think, at my age anyway. I think the young people, it's so important. If you're going to do a change, do it quick, because what cements your business is actually, being in your patch where people know you. And I got 40 years of that. So I'm quite lucky that a lot of my callings is for the referral business because of families that know me.
So let's talk just quickly about the different areas of Australia, just to, I guess, go back over this. But aside from all the wonderful things about Sydney and your part of town where you specialize, if you have somebody that's moving to Australia or wants to buy a property there, obviously it could be, primary residence or a second home or whatever it might be. But if you're explaining what their options are in the different regions in the different major cities, how would you describe that in sort of a short elevator conversation between each area?
Well, the main thing is you've got to ask the question, do you have children? You know, and what schools are you looking at? So particularly, I mean, I'm very eastern suburb centric. So the top schools that we have, and most people who I ask the question, how important is it for you to be close to your school? And they say 100%. So we've got King Koppel, we've got Kambala. They're the two big girls' schools. And we've got Scots College and Cranbrook. I mean, these are all private schools. So you actually find that those buyers will be within a kilometre, because our traffic is just crazy, So people tend to buy close to the schools. So that's my first thing. I push the Belvy Hill, Vaucluse, Rose Bay. And that's an area that's close to these high-end schools or private schools. The next question is, if they haven't got families, and I say, where do you work? Or where are you intending working? If it's going to be close to the CBD, it's important they're close to train stations. So typically we've got Bondi Junction. That's a train station that connects to the city. There's Edgecliff, Wallara connects to the city. And Edgecliff, Wallara is a bit hoity-toity, which is a bit of a higher-end suburb. And people like to be close to that so they can be in walking distance to their train and off into the city. But then there's some people that love living in the city. We have all these incredible high rises. I'm blessed to have a listing called the Harrington Collection. And if you want to look at that, you should write this address down. It's the penthouse 801 of 85 Harrington Street, the Rocks. And that's the most iconic area. And what you're seeing behind you, that bridge and Opera House view, is what you see from the lounge room window. And just to give you an idea of price, that apartment's about 344 square meters internally. Now, I know you guys work in feet, so I don't know what that is in feet. I'll let you do the calculation. And you're looking at a cool 35 million for that. So, but they're people who want to be in the city, want the lifestyle of the Rocks, of all the restaurants. We got a guy called Justin Hems that is known for all the best restaurants in the city, bars, entertainment, culture, theatres, all that sort of stuff. So there's a big city dwelling as well. Then you have the appetite where people want to be on the beach. they're surfies, they want to be on Bondi Beach and get up in the morning, do their 10K run to Tamarama and back and surf in the morning. So there's a beach culture as well. And that's pretty huge. Not so much in winter, but summer, it just goes crazy. I think Bondi Beach is probably one of the most iconic beaches in Australia. Everyone knows Bondi Beach. I'm sure you know that as well. I don't know, maybe. But the whole world visits Bondi Beach. And then you've got rural. There's people who want to do the tree change. And I'm not too sure what are the best areas in rural, but some people love to have those hobby farms, and it's just that's a different world out there. And there's some really cool agents out there that do that rural really well. Sometimes the Central Coast, where these new developing suburbs, they're a lower social economic area. But we got a place called Byron, and Byron is now probably one of the highest valued properties, and these places tend to grow. So people do like to get out of the city and perhaps have it as a second home. So there's so many different things that we can offer when an international client comes in, or just a client comes in, is that we've got different sorts of landscapes for every buyer. But traditionally, I deal in the eastern suburbs, which is the blue chip zone, and obviously there's some parts of the city. Actually, that's what you've got behind you there is the penthouse. It's probably one of the most sought after penthouses. These things take a bit of time, but that view is actually what you see on the balcony. Now, what you've got there, international clients want that bridge, they want the harbour and the opera house. To get all three, that's what the international clients want. And it's quite amazing. That's what people want. It's what agents want to sell. And I'm very blessed to have that signed and listed and ready to go.
I grabbed that off your website. That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about the different areas of Australia, like really high level. So you've got Western Australia, what's there? Eastern Australia, why do you go northeast versus east versus southeast versus west? These different regions.
Well, I think north is a much warmer climate. And look, Sydney, Australia, the prices have been crazy. I mean, just to put things in context, we were selling little one-bedroom apartments, 50 square meters for 1.2 million. Whereas in Queensland, you could possibly buy a house for that. So there's a lifestyle in Queensland. It's all beaches. There's also so many brand new developments, and there's such a range of properties. Brisbane is probably the CBD, that's the capital of Queensland, and Brisbane actually, is a very big city hub, but it's really affordable. To buy this apartment or any apartment in the city, you're probably looking somewhere between the 3 and 5 million for something basic, and something that's very, very upmarket can go from 5 to 20 million with views, obviously. In Queensland, it's kind of half that, sometimes even a quarter of that. And Queensland also has a connection up to the very top north of Queensland, where I think there's this, I suppose, protective forests. And, there's a lot of people who want to be up in that sort of tree change and just escape that hustle and bustle of life. It's surrounded by beautiful islands and things like that. And also very close to go to, obviously, overseas to Indonesia or Bali. Everyone likes to go there for holidays, or Thailand. And I think Queensland has a lower density as well. So there's a lot of stuff to see in Queensland. But typically on Perth, now I'm not too sure about Perth, but Perth is also an area where people travel to Perth because, again, the prices of real estate are probably, nowhere near the prices of what we have. So a typical house over there could be anywhere between 800,000 to 900,000 Australian, where a typical house here in Sydney can start from 3 to 4 million. That's the vast difference, why people go, to Perth or Western Australia. Melbourne is actually a bit like Sydney at the moment, has a high culture, very big into their restaurants and theatre and all that sort of stuff, and very arty. they also have an incredible growth with apartments, and they're also starting to see, Sydney and Melbourne again are becoming quite pricey. If you want value for money, yeah, you go to Western Australia, you go to North Queensland. There's also South Australia, which I'm not really know a lot about, but again, when I look at the prices, they're nowhere near our prices at the moment. In fact, uh, some of the houses I see they can start from $400,000 to $500,000, which is just, yeah, I don't think you can even get a studio for that here in Sydney.
So just to interrupt you real quickly, for those that aren't familiar with Australia, and I'm looking at the map here, you have Western Australia and the major city is Perth. You have
Yeah,
Northern Territory of Australia, which is probably mostly desert type environment, except for the northern shore. It looks like there's a city called Darwin there. You
yeah,
have, you have Southern Australia, and that again is right in the middle of the country on the south side, and there's Adelaide. Um,
mm,
and then you have, and Adelaide is sort of on the southeast corner of that Southern Australia region. You have Northeast Australia, which is Queensland, and Southeast Australia, which is New South Wales. So in that Northeast area, I'm not sure which cities you consider the most, the highest or the most notable, but is it Cairns? Is that right?
well,
C A I
Cairns, yeah, yeah,
Cairns.
Cairns is it's a very hot suburb, very, very hot. But the big people love Brisbane, and I love Gold Coast, and that's where all the action is. With high rises, entertainment. See, obviously all the businesses are there as well.
Got it.
As I said, I'm not a Queenslander, but I just know that Brisbane is the most active area in terms of development, and also Gold Coast because of its beaches, and there's incredible entertainment there, and the hotels are being built and high rises there. It's like there's a high rise every couple of months being built. So there's a massive shift going from, I believe, from New South Wales to Queensland because of lifestyle and affordability.
So Brisbane is on the east coast, right in the middle of the country. I'm again looking at the map here. So nicely central as far as the north and the south of the country. And then Sydney is a little bit further south. So I assume you get, maybe you said, a little bit of a milder climate. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I was actually invited to go to Cairns, and I went to an eco lodge where they don't believe in air conditioning. I lasted exactly 2 days. I mean,
Yeah.
that's real heat. you know.
Now,
Um,
is it scuba diving that is good in Cairns? Is that what I heard?
I think anything up from north of Queens, anything around Queensland, out to the ocean, up to the north, scuba. We've got the Great Barrier Reef, and that's a major attraction for people who visit our country. And the scuba diving is out of this world. Actually, I met a couple of American guys. They were blown away, and in fact, they extended their trip. They were just blown away, and I think they went on every tour possible, and they loved it. And they said it was just amazing, and they just loved the fact that there was just no pollution. We did have an issue with our barrier reef where we had some sort of heat, or what it was going on, or too many starfish. I'm not too sure. And they love the fact of how the governments really went in there to try and protect the reef. And in all fairness, that's why people also come to Queensland, is because the natural beauties that we have in that area.
So you had mentioned transportation and the train and things like that. I just got back from a trip to Italy, and of course, Europe has the speed trains and networked, and Italy was covered in trains. So we didn't have a car. We just went around by train. Maybe we would get a taxi here and there, or the local train. So how does that transportation look there in Australia? And do most people use it, or do most people have cars, or is it a mix?
Yeah, look, I don't think we're known for having these great trains, and something that we need to look at. But we're building some really good roads. And that's where I think New South Wales government, Queensland government are collaborating, making it a lot easier for people to commute by car. And obviously, we have the bus system. Trains are there, but it's not like in Japan, you've got these super trains that come in and you're there in an hour. But I think there's plans to do that in the future. But most people, funny enough, will just do this hire. We've got all these car sharing apps now, which is quite amazing, and car hire, of course. And people who come to Australia, they just use our roads. I think our roads system going from state to state is pretty good. You know, when you get into the city, it's a different story, you know.
Right. So it's sounds like it's common to have a car and to use the, the
Yeah,
ways and the roads and things of that nature.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've covered some of these different major areas and major cities. West was Perth, and then of course Queensland, the northeast side, and Brisbane. You have South Australia, which was Adelaide, correct? And then you have the New South Wales, which is your part of the world, and that's Sydney and Melbourne. And Melbourne's kind of on the south side, and they have looks like beaches, and then Sydney has their own beaches as well on the east. What are the seasons there for you as far as summer and winter and hanging out on the beach?
Well, I think New South Wales is pretty much known for the beach culture. When we hit spring, summer, the whole world's here. You know, they love the fact that we've got, well, we do have the safest beaches, except for occasional shark here and there. But other than that, I think we just got, I mean, Bondi Beach is probably the most recognized beach in the world. And it's funny, you go there in summer, you know, you're meeting every different type of person from all over the world. You know, it's quite amazing. And I think that's just, the big thing. Winter is not our great time for tourism. In fact, this year has been our coldest winter. We've had temperatures as low as 3 degrees. I know in America, you guys can get 20 below zero, something crazy like that. But our temperatures tend not to go too far below the zero. We've got a place called Jindabyne where people can go skiing in winter, and which is pretty good. And Mount Kosciuszko, all that sort of area is known for skiing.
And where is that?
But mainly Jindabyne is a couple about 2 hours from Sydney. It's more in the mountains area. And if you look at areas like Mount Kosciuszko, Jindabyne, all that particular area there is where most people go skiing. But we're under competition because New Zealand has skiing, Japan has skiing, all that sort of stuff. But we're pretty known. Look, it's not as the best, in the world. But if you want to come to Australia in winter, that's probably where, if you're a skier, you'd go there. You know, it's great for the family. And then obviously with that morphs into summer, you've got these beautiful lakes there, and there's things to do to do there as well. But the main thing sorry, go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just was going to ask, what are the months for your winter and the summer?
Oh, sorry. So typically from July, well, actually June to say August is our kind of winter, and then September's our spring, and then November, so October, November, January, Feb is our real summer. That's when it gets really hot, Typically December to February can be really hot. We can hit temperatures of 40 degrees, which is pretty heavy. But, a good summer temperature for us is 28 to 30 degrees. I know you guys do Fahrenheit, but yeah, it's, I don't want to get into the climate change, but it seems to be getting colder in winter and a bit hotter in summer. So,
well, 40 degrees Celsius is about 104 degrees Fahrenheit here.
Yeah.
It's what we're doing every day right now in Texas this summer. We have an extraordinarily hot summer right now.
Yeah. What temperature is that?
We've been hitting 105 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, 40 or so degrees Celsius right now in Texas.
Yeah, it's pretty, and sometimes we get days where we can have a week of that. We had a situation where South Australia, which I still can't work out why they would get it, they had about 10 days of 40, just nonstop. We might get 1 or 2 days of 40 and it goes back to 30, but it's unusual. Temperatures all over the place. We have a laugh when the Weather Bureau say it's going to rain tomorrow. It doesn't. And when they say it's sunny, it rains. So, yeah, it's quite funny, actually.
Well,
Not good for open inspections.
Right. Well, look, I didn't know that there was skiing in your area, a couple hours from your area, so that's new information to me. It sounds like the beaches are amazing. I have not personally been to Australia. It's on my bucket list. And when I was
Oh,
a Boy Scout many years ago, there was a man from Adelaide who was there volunteering, and he and I have kept in touch all these years. And so, it's always been near and dear to my heart and something that I've wanted to do. But, where do you even start? It's such a big country. It really would be hard to just go once or go for a short period of time. So, anyway, so I've been intrigued by it for a long time, but let's shift just real quickly so we can be efficient with our time. Let's shift to just talking about buying and selling houses and what it's like. Let's first talk about
yeah.
what it's like to be I guess, to work with a realtor. How do the commissions work? Do you have an MLS? Does the listing agent typically represent the buyer and the seller side? Just generally, how is it structured there?
So basically, being a real estate agent, you are always acting for the vendor, right? That's it. Legalities tells us you got to act in the best interest for the vendor. Obviously, you give your professional service and give the buyer a professional experience in buying, but you are acting for the vendor at all times. Commissions are typically around the
The vendor being the
2.2%.
seller.
Yes, the vendor being the seller. Yeah. And you can act for companies, you can act for mum and dad, you can act for a single person, deceased estates, like you guys. I think it's all vendors can come with different shapes and sizes. But typically our commissions are 2.2%. That's including the GST, which is our tax on sales and or services. And sometimes these commissions get negotiated, and unfortunately, because it's such a heavily, I suppose, a competitive business, there are some agents that want to become turnover agents. So the level of service will drop, unfortunately. They'll list as many as they can, and their commission's a lot lower, and it'll go through a process, and whatever sells. That's one of the dangers of being a real estate agent. You've got to make that decision. Are you going to be a serviced agent or a turnover agent? I've always been a serviced agent, always have, and I'll never change. And my fees are usually between that 1.8% to 2.2%. It ranges in that, depending on what they want me to do. And yes, my fees are quite high, but the service comes with it as well, especially in times like this. Typically, most of the properties are taken to an auction sale. Now, this is where you actually put a property which is backed in by massive marketing, which is our websites, domain.com and realestate.com. They're our two massive digital umbrellas for property, and they're obviously advertised on the World Wide Web. And they're taken through a 4-week process, which involves a lot of open inspections, which you call open houses, private inspections, leading up to an auction day or night. And this is where it's like very much like an art auction. There will be a reserve, which is the minimum price that the vendor will accept, which is only privy to me and the auctioneer. And the buyers will compete for that property. And usually it can be one buyer, it can be 5 buyers, can be 10 buyers, and they'll compete for the property. And should it reach the reserve, on the fall of the hammer, the property is then considered sold. In fact, the power of the auctioneer is so strong that he can actually sign on behalf of the vendor or the purchaser. And most of these auctions at the moment, we have what we call a clearance rate, and that's running about 70%, which is not bad. But funny enough, during COVID, 21, 22, our clearance rates were crazy. They were at 90%, which was unrealistic. So we've kind of slowed down a bit. A balanced market to me is 70 to 80%. And 90% of our properties that sell in Sydney, New South Wales is through the auction system. And you can sell a property prior to auction as well. We are actually governed by, I suppose, what we call Department of Fair Trading, which is a government body that's like the police of real estate agents, that we're allowed to give a guide price, but our guide price has to be in line with what our agency agreement says. So typically if I was to sell your home and you said your home was worth 1 million to say to 1.1, so it's a 10% range, I'll do my comparable sales to make sure it fits in line with that. And usually it kind of does. I can't quote below the figure that's on my agency agreement because that's called baiting. So we guide $1 million and we have up to 10% to move from that range. And if buyer interest is moving a lot higher, then we're kind of deemed to guide buyers that it's now starting to move up. So there's a lot of interaction with buyers, you know, and we are policed on this as well. A rogue agent will use a system called baiting, where he knows it's probably worth 1 million to 1.1. They'll guide like 800 to get everybody in. And unfortunately, I just don't think, you know, that's going to serve any purpose for any of our buyers or vendors. So at Highland, we typically, we're by the book. We are definitely by the book. We're known for that, and that's why people like to use us. So whatever we guide, you know, and of course, sometimes there can be competition where we're quite surprised. To give an example, we've had situations where we've had multiple buyers on a property where there's been so much competition, it's actually gone above our guide price and sometimes above the reserve price. But that is the actual physical market, you know, competing for a property. And that does happen a lot too.
Let me make sure I
And
understand
by
this.
the way,
Go ahead.
no, just saying that a lot, and all our agencies or all our properties are exclusive. So we have an exclusive agreement with our seller. So we don't do this this open listing that, you know, that a lot of agents do, like a multi-list. We don't do that.
So just so I understand, you have an exclusive listing agreement. You typically do an auction. You
Yeah.
work into this day or two. You're working towards it by marketing it. You have domain, what was it, domain.com and realtor.com?
Domain.com.au and realestate.com.au. And then we got the Highland website as well. And sometimes there's little portals that go off as well that we use, but they're the two umbrellas. And plus we use a print media, which is like a local magazine. And that's called the Wentworth Courier, which has about a 60,000 readership. And I still that has some merit in the process of selling.
So but you don't have an MLS.
What's that? You know,
The
what's that?
multiple listing service. So here in the United States, we have associations, and in order to have access to your multiple listing service, that you become a member of your local association, and in Texas, you then become a member automatically of the state association and then the national association. There is an MLS. The associations often own those MLSs. There might be several associations that own an MLS. The MLS is the actual technology service. So they may purchase the technology from a third-party vendor. There's one called CoreLogic that provides the actual technology of the MLS, but they have this data agreement with the local real estate agencies or realtors. So the data is entered into the MLS by the agents when they get a new listing, and that then all the other agents can go into the MLS and run a search query for whatever they're looking for properties for sale, just like you would on a realtor.com or another third-party portal. But you can go in there and you can slice and dice it, and then you can save the search and have notifications sent to your customers about, you know, they can go into a portal and see all the listings that fit the criteria, and they'll get email notifications when a new listing hits the market or something has a price change or whatever. That's our MLS. So we have an MLS,
Yeah.
and we have third-party portals which actually get fed from the data going into the MLS.
So back in the early 70s, 80s, we had a thing called multi-list. So you're part of that. Same sort of thing you guys got. We don't have that anymore because the way that we work, we're very much vendor-centric. Me, it's about getting listings. We have, because of realestate.com, domain.com, if an agent has a buyer and he's kind of helping a buyer, you know, that's not my job, by the way. I'm a listing agent.
Okay.
The agent that kind of wants to help a buyer, they simply go on realestate.com.domain.com. They might give me a call and I say, Dan, look, I've got this client, they're moving from Adelaide, say, can you help them out? You know, sometimes there might be a referral fee. We'll give them a referral fee, or there might be a conjunction where I might say, listen, I really need to sell this. I'll give you 50% of my fee, you know. Even in the franchise system, we've got some very big franchises like Elger Hooker, Ray White, Century 21, where they have their network. And sometimes they might do a bit of that. But we have now what we call buyer's agents. And buyer's agents are actually doing that at the moment. They're getting paid by the buyer and they're sourcing the property, and they ring me and say, Dan, this property looks like it's going to fit my client. Can we get through tomorrow? My fee's protected, their fee's protected. So we don't really have that multi-list system, and I don't think it really worked for us. Now, I think it's because we've always got the shortage of stock and we've got plentiful buyers. You know what I mean? Whereas I'm not too sure. I was watching a very old movie called Glengarry Glen Ross. I don't know if you ever, it's one of your best real estate movies, but can't believe you haven't seen that movie. Al Pacino's in it. And I could kind of get understand that real estate there was, it was all more about the buyer. We need the buyers, you know what I mean? And I kind of get that system that if you don't have the buyers out there, it's a big thing. And you guys had a lot of stock, you know what I mean? The stock was there for you, just couldn't have the buyers. We're kind of different. We don't have the stock, and we do have a lot of buyers. And now we have buyers that are represented by buyers agents. So that multi-list system doesn't really fit in our framework, our platform, but it does exist softly in franchise groups. And I've worked for these big franchise groups, and it's not that active. You know, it's not a big, I think, a big thing. Cross-selling, you know, where we have maybe our office has particular clients involved, that can work, but it's not an everyday thing that I find that Sydney agents are using at the moment.
I want to get back to some of what we were just talking about, because we just went in a kind of a big loop covering both sides, but I want to not forget about the auction process. And then I'm going to get back to the buyer side as well. But just so I understand, you list a property, you have an exclusive listing agreement, you're marketing the property through these couple of websites, including your own, and you're doing print advertising, all these things, and you're preparing for what is typically an auction, and that would happen over a day or two. And there are typically buyers in tow who will compete. You have a recommended price, and then you have a, you know, purchase it today once you hit this number price. And from what I understood you to say is it could go over that price that, you know, the seller's willing to go ahead and drop the hammer and move forward if there's competition. Is that correct? It could actually go over.
Yeah, I mean, actually, my colleague, Brendan, just gave me a case study. So typically we had an apartment in Mallara, and we had told the vendor between 1.8 and 2 million as a range. Actually, it was 1.85 to 2 million. And we said what we should do is let's just guide the 2 million. Let's see if we can get someone to pay around the 2 million. We sold it for 2.1, and it was on the market for 22 days, which is typically the time. Last year, our days on market was around 14 days, but now it's around the 22, which is the normal time. And the method of sale was auction. We had 194 emails or inquiries, and we had 5 contracts there, people who've requested a contract of sale. And obviously out of that 5 groups, there was a winner, and they actually paid obviously 100,000 more than anybody else to own that property. So we have a saying in real estate, it's not how long a property's been in the market for, it's how long the buyer has. And I think the buyers who have been in the market more than 6 months are going to be more aggressive. And they're the ones, typically, they'll say, Daniel, what do I have to pay to get this prior to auction? We love that. And obviously with a bit of negotiation and street smarts, you'll be able to get an offer that will make commercial sense for the vendor.
Let me make sure I
But then I
understand.
have to, sorry.
You have this auction period. So when you list the property, are you saying, we're going to market this and solicit offers for the next 14 days or 21 days? Like you said that the days on market has gotten longer. How does that work if you're setting an auction date and a deadline?
So typically an auction program is 4 weeks. You have your off-market week where you don't actually go online. You send out to your database, talk to fill buyers agents. You kind of get a litmus test on what, where we're sitting in price. It's a bit of a test run. And sometimes you can sell in that period as well. So remember, it's a 4-week auction program, but you can sell that property anytime prior to the auction.
Okay.
So typically last year, all my programs was booked in for 4 weeks of marketing and the auction date. 80% of my properties sold prior, and they all sold within 14 days.
Got it.
So it was a very aggressive
Because you hit a
market.
certain number.
Now, I'm sorry?
That's because you had a, so does the buyer, the people making the offers, do they know what the number is that the seller will take, or is that confidential? And so
Oh,
whatever
no.
you get an offer that is at or above the target number, that then
Yeah.
you can accept it.
Yeah, so every vendor is different. So I have a set for sale meeting. So before I go to market, I'll say to the vendor, is there a price that you're happy to sell prior to auction to? If you got that, it makes it a lot easier too. So if you typically, I had a house, I had a vendor, we told him his house was worth between 7 and 7.5. We were guiding 7. He said to me, if you can get me 7.5, I'll sell prior, maybe 7.4. We had about, I think it must have been about 20 buyers. One buyer came in at 7. We negotiated to 7,350, but the kicker was the buyer said, I will settle in 1 week. So I said to the vendor, I know you want 7.4, 7.5, and typically you've got to wait 6 to 8 or 12 weeks for your money. This buyer has given me 7,350, 1 week settlement, and the problem is they're flying out next week. What do you want to do? And they said, Dan, I'll take it. Now looking at the stats of that was an auction, it was booked for 4 weeks. We had 107 inquiries, 2 contracts out. It sold for 7,350, and it was 11 days on the market.
So you said that there's typically a 70 to 80% clearance rate. So does that mean that your 20 to 30% of the listings don't have an acceptable contract by the end of that 4-week auction period?
Yeah. So when we say 70% clearance rates, it includes the ones that sell prior. The ones that don't sell will go straight into private treaty. Now they don't really add those statistics in. So you can an auction sale can also happen after. You got prior, on the day, and after. But I think after 14 days, there's an issue. Now, it could be the property, could be the price, it could be both. You know what I mean? So it's so important that when you take a property to market is to know what you're dealing with. A lot of agents will go in and get all excited, take the property to market, but they didn't do a building and pest report. And when that buyer comes in the night before the auction, all very excited, they do their building and pest and half the place is falling apart, you just blown it. So I prepare. I want to know what I'm up against, you know what I mean? And if there's something that I think is really bad, I'll say, Mr. Vendor, let's not market it yet. Let's get these things fixed. Because, our job is also to eliminate every negative thing we can on a property. And if you can do that effectively, it makes it easy for the vendor to transact, So, but typically the real estate market is still so strong, 70% clearance rate's pretty good. Talking about Adelaide, I remember they were down at 30% clearance rates. And that could be for a whole amount of reasons, you know what I mean? Yeah. When you go sub 50, so when COVID happened, everybody in the whole world, all these guys said, this is it, real estate's finished, your house is going to be worth half, the whole place is about to explode. and the banks are going to go. That just gave such a dim picture. Well, it was the absolute opposite. We had clearance rates at one. I think we had one clearance rate for 1 month. It was 98%. It's insane, and my 40-year career never saw that.
We were expecting the same thing
So-
here, and the same thing happened. It was definitely unexpected. We were locking down for the housing crisis, and it did the opposite. But so basically, because you don't have an MLS, all listings are generally private listings for the brokerage that holds the listing. I assume that the relationship with the seller, you call them the vendor, is owned by the brokerage, and you as an independent contractor work for the brokerage, but that must be the relationship. I'm a broker.
Yes.
So I'm responsible for my agent's business. If they have a mistake or all their work, I'm responsible for. Is that the same?
Well, we have compliance, and probably Highland is known as the most compliant business. And agents, at the end of the day, will try and find a way how to circumvent certain things. But nothing will go on market, online, or through the system until it's 100% perfect in compliance. And we have a lot of hoops to jump to make sure it's compliant. But you are, as an agent, I am responsible. Even though I'm an independent contractor and I plug into Highland, if I make a mistake, I get the fine, they get the fine. So, and I only got in fact, I only got audited a couple of weeks ago, and it happens. And they check your agency agreement, they check what you're guiding, they're checking you've got a contract of sale. You, in this country, or New South Wales, you're not allowed to market or sell a property until you have a contract of sale. If you market a property without a contract, you are fined. You know what I mean? There's so many. In fact, I think we're the most over-governed business in Australia, which is not a bad thing, but can also be quite frustrating as well. But I understand they have to do it, and I'm sure it's happening in the financial world now with bankers and banks and everything, and brokers and all that sort of stuff. So we are heavily governed.
So let me go back for just a second. So you have an auction, the house doesn't sell. It's one of the, 10, 20, 30% not clearing. What changes? Because your auction date has passed, you didn't get the offer. So now is it considered an auction anymore? Or what did you say it was at that point moving forward?
So I got one at the moment. I've got a property at the moment. She bought a property. She put it on the market during the holiday season, which wasn't great. Now we haven't a lot of buyers for it, so we're going to make the choice to extend the campaign. So we're going to extend this campaign by at least another 3 weeks, because now most of the buyers are back, and that's not a uncommon thing in our business. But if we go to auction and it passes in, or what we then have to do is sit down and work out what the for sale price is. You know what I mean? So we just have to adjust a price that makes sense to the buying market. So we call that now private treaty. But auctions are 3 stages. As I said, you can sell prior, you can sell in a day, or you can sell after. Not a great thing, because sometimes if you don't sell in the night, there could be procrastination from both sides, the vendor or the buyer. But also depends on the motivation of a vendor as well. We have a highly motivated vendor, but we don't have highly motivated buyers in this current period, because we've got these interest rates. No one knows what's happening. It's very, very confusing for people out there. In fact, there was an article talking about how last year people were buying on the fear of missing out. Buyers typically now are kind of holding back, making sure they don't make a mistake. And that's where we are at the moment. But I still believe that it doesn't matter what market you go in, the auction business or the auction sale, or the auction process. In fact, I suppose I phrase it a different way. If you said to me, what is the best way to sell a property in Australia? I still believe in the auction system, because what it does, it's high compression selling. It brings everybody into a period of 4 weeks to make a decision. I'm horrified with you guys in America. I hear your properties could be on the market for 6 to 12 months. So that just blows my mind. Mind you, your commissions are much better. But, any property that's on the market more than 3 months, we're already freaking out.
Well, I want to talk about the commissions. I want to talk about the the process once you have a contract here in a second.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
I guess before I do that, just so I understand the buyer side of this whole deal, we're talking about the listing side. I understand the exclusive relationship, who's responsible. I understand that you said that there are buyer agents who can represent the buyer. Some, and at least here in the States, you might have somebody that does both. I do both. I help buyers, I help sellers. I exclusively list houses for sale, but I can also help a buyer. And there are
Mhm.
situations where they're rare for me, but there's situations where I might act as an intermediary where I'm representing the seller. The buyer comes in that I'm helping find a house, and I say, hey, this is a good fit. Are y'all comfortable moving forward? And I intermediate. I can't tell the seller what the buyer will pay. I can't tell the buyer what the seller will take, but I help guide them through the process. Some brokerages may get one of their agents within the brokerage to take the buyer, whereas they would keep the seller and they would work out a commission deal. But on the buyer side there, how does it differ from that? And it sounds like the buyer will get paid from the buyer agent gets paid from the buyer. Here, our agreement with the seller includes an offer of compensation to the buyer. So when you have a listing, the seller actually agrees to compensation to the buyer. It could be $1, or it could be, a percentage that's negotiable. However, it's something that they offer up. And so often the buyer side agent is paid through the closing through the seller on the closing statement, and their buyer doesn't have to pay anything. So it sounds like, you mentioned 1.8 to 2.2% on the list side is kind of an average. On the buy side, it sounded like that 2% range, and the buyer actually pays. And then in addition to that, I'd like to know how buyers are purchasing. Are they using cash, or is the typical deal like here where they put 20% down on a 30-year conventional loan at, today's going interest rate is 6.8% on average throughout the country. So what's different there?
Yeah. Yeah. So as a vendor, vendors pay the agent, the selling agent, 2.2% or agreed fee. That's it. They won't pay for anything else. They'll pay for their marketing as well. But the buyer, if they do employ a buyer's agent, they will pay the buyer's agent. And it's usually, 1.5 to 2.2% of the sale price, you know. Um,
Is
and that's
that
what they do.
included in the loan if they get a loan? And do most people buy with?
No, loan separate. So we actually we have our own finance in Highland, so we will refer the Highlands finance, or the buyer's agent might have their own broker. Most people have their own brokers, but we do have that referral network. So basically it's two separate things. And buyers generally will have finance. So they put down a 10% deposit down, or agreed deposit. I usually don't like taking anything under 5%. Settlement times are usually 6 weeks, but we can negotiate that out to 12 weeks. Or, I mean, I just did one the other day. I actually sold something in the Central Coast, not my area. And it was a development site of 12 townhouses. And I negotiated a 5% deposit, but it had a cooling off period. Now, in Australia, in New South Wales, because every state's different, when you buy a property, you can have a 5-day cooling off period on any property. The only way we don't like to do that, so we ask our buyer to get what they call a Section 66W certificate. That waivers any cooling off period, and that's done through the exchange of contracts. Auctions, right? You don't need a 66W. When the hammer comes down, it's an unconditional contract. So the point I was making, that sometimes when we do a contract, it could be subject to finance, and we don't like it because in most cases, when it's subject to finance, there's so many balls up in the air that something could go wrong in evaluation. Buyer gets cold feet, bank gets cold feet. So that's why typically I love the auction, because it's unconditional done, Yeah,
Not
so that's
contingent on
what kind of
financing.
works.
The auction.
Sorry?
The auction process is not contingent on financing.
No, once you buy at auction, that's it,
And let's say
everything's like,
let's say you're going to buy, and unless you're telling me that pretty much everybody buys with cash, then essentially you're agreeing, and let's say you move forward, but you're going to finance and the financing doesn't work out, and then you can't move forward, then what are the penalties? What's the outcomes here? But I'm trying to get an idea
Massive.
of what,
Yeah, it's massive.
trying to get an idea of what the difference is here. Almost everybody finances their purchases. There are a percentage that are cash, but it is a smaller number.
Yeah, same here. I mean, you do get your cash buys. Typically what you do is you should get a conditional approval from the bank. So it gives you an idea. And look, most brokers won't let their buyers buy unless they know they're okay with everything. There has been, look, basically, if you don't complete, you lose your 10% deposit, and you could be sued for subsequential losses. So if you buy a home at auction for $1 million and you don't complete, that vendor gets 100,000, and then if they go back to auction and they only sell for 800, they could sue you for the difference.
Right.
Very rare. Look, it's very rare it happens. I've got a situation now where a buyer has bought before they've sold. It was my recommendation they shouldn't do it in this market. Now she got a lot of pressure, and if we don't sell, I'm sure we will sell, but if she doesn't sell, she'll then have to go into what they call bridging finance, and that's very, very expensive. I'm sure you have that as well. Big money to do that.
This is somebody that their financing didn't work out, a buyer, and they use the bridge financing?
No. What actually happens, some people will buy before they sell. They put their property in the market thinking they're going to sell in 6 weeks, and it doesn't. They have a settlement time they need to abide by, and there could be a gap of a week, 2 weeks, 3 months. So the bridging finance is very expensive. This is where the banks really make their money.
So the buyers are carrying a lot of risk. You really need to be comfortable that you can afford to purchase a home, that the financing is going to work out. Once you commit, there's like here we have a negotiable amount of time, which is, let's just say 7 to 10 days, but it's negotiable to do inspections. You can terminate for any reason. It sounds like your cooling off period. You get an inspection, you find that there's problems, you ask the seller to address those issues, and if you can come to an agreement, then you basically sign an amendment that says they'll do these things, and you waive the rest of that termination option period. And then you have some other contingencies moving forward that may be financing, it may be title objections, because we have title commitments to insure the property. We have HOAs, homeowners associations, where you may have HOA documents that have to be delivered within 10 or 15 days, and then the buyer has 3 days to terminate after receiving that information, because what if it's a mess? So those are the types of contingencies we have here. What about your process?
Well, we're probably a little bit more, and I say with all respect, a bit more advanced than that. Even with UK, they have a terrible system. We have a contract of sale. So before we go to market, the contract of sale will give us the particulars of the title, any easements, covenants, sewer diagrams, asbestos reports, all this sort of stuff, all this information, right? And if anything's ugly in there, we're going to know about it, so that's why they call it a disclosure document. So I understand why you shouldn't sell a property without actually having a contract first. So typically I will look at the contract and say, oh, geez, there's a big easement here. I didn't know about that. We may have to relook at our pricing, which sometimes happens. So if I've got a good contract, it's clean and everything, at least we know that document's all good to go. Hence, if a buyer comes in and their finance is approved, right, very easy to do an exchange, and also making sure it's unconditional. The only reason why I do a cooling off period is whether it's subject to finance, or a developer requests it for what they call their D&D, their due diligence, just making sure they can put 12 townhouses on and that sort of stuff. So if you've done your homework, it shouldn't be an issue,
So it sounds like all the work's done on the front end. All the work's done on the front end, basically presenting information to a buyer where they can be confident that they can move forward. It's almost like the inspection's done for you already.
Yeah, correct. And in actual fact, I even go one step further. I think I mentioned this before. When you're buying an apartment, get the STRA report already. And there's facilities now where you can actually order a strata report, gives you all the financials and all the dealings in the block, making sure no one's getting sued, all that sort of stuff. So a buyer can actually access a contract, access a report, do their due diligence, and be right for the auction or right for an offer. You know, what I hate is when people don't do their due diligence and the night before the auction they get their strata report or building report and it's a mess. You know what I mean? And you've worked all that time and then you're going to say to you that I'm sorry, but you know, and I reckon that's an agent issue. I think that before you take a property on, know what you're selling, know what's in the block. Now, typically we had a situation where we had a vendor said, Dan, my block is fine, there's no issues, it's all good. And we got the strata report and it wasn't. You know, there was massive debt, there was high levies, the whole bit. And, you know, at least we know about it, you know, and we call that material fact. We have to disclose that to the purchaser. And that's a big thing in New South Wales is about disclosure. Material
buyers
fact.
get out of the deal if they find out after the contract is executed that there's problems.
Yeah, so given a famous case, the Gonzalez case, there was a property that an agent sold to a buyer, and apparently it was a house where there was a murder scene. There were family were butchered and killed in the home, and there was no mention of it from the agent. Now, the buyers who actually settled on the property found out about this. Well, actually, no, I think it was before settlement. They found out about this and they took it to court and they won because the agent didn't disclose. It's called material fact. Since that court case, they've now changed all our agency agreements to say that can the vendor tell us, has it ever been used as a drug lab? Has it ever been part of a crime scene? And I think it's a good thing, you know. And I've had an apartment which was part of a crime scene and I disclosed it to people, right? And I know it's going to sound crazy, but kind of people weren't too worried about it because I disclosed it and it was pretty cool. But it's when you don't disclose something and it's a surprise, you know, you can be fined, lose your license over that as well. And that's what I love about this business, that they really, the culture of this business is about doing the right thing.
So, and I agree, but so you have the buyer side of agents, they're getting paid from the buyer, that's separate from the contract in the financing. So at closing, they're going to have a number that the buyer pays on commission, and then they're going to have a number that they pay the seller for a down payment, whatever the deposits were, and then whatever amount is being financed, which you said is the majority, is what it sounds like, finance. Is that right?
Well, yeah, that's right. Well, the buyer's agent has also rules and regulations because basically if I'm talking to a buyer's agent, I'm actually talking to the buyer, but the buyer's agent is doing all the hard work. Again, he has to get a copy of the contract, make sure he gets it to a lawyer. He should be saying, listen, we should get a strata report, should get a building pest report. He's got to do his due diligence for his client. And again, there's also rogue buyers agents out there who just want to get a fee and don't say anything and just get the deal done. Again, they're going to lose their license. So there's also been a bit of an overhaul in buyers agents that they have to act professionally. And their job is not to get try and get a deal, a cheap deal. It's facilitating the process so the buyer is aware of what they're doing, you know, where they can afford it, where they can buy, and do they get all the appropriate reports prior to the sale.
So do you have associations of real estate agents or not?
Yeah. So I've got about 110 buyers agents on my database. Not that I use them all, but there's probably about 5 that I use that are very active in my area. And typically what I do, when I say if I was selling for you, the first thing I would do is say, what I want to do is let's hit my database of all the buyers and the buyer's agents. The reason being the buyer's agent are being paid by a buyer. Now, if a buyer is paying a buyer's agent, they must be highly motivated to buy a property. You know,
Right.
It's not rocket science. So Usually they're the buyer's agents that come running in and say, Dan, we love it. We've been looking for this. What do we have to do to get it? And I love dealing with buyer's agents because they just know what to do, you know. But the big question I ask is, how long has your client been looking for? I don't have to say that with buyer's agents because obviously they've been looking for a long time, and they're not getting anywhere. So that's why they use a buyer's agent to get into buying a property.
Interesting. So these buyer agents, it sounds like there's not a lot of inventory, and it's been that way for quite some time. It's very valuable to have the listing itself. But, I would say, I guess, how many percentage wise, how many buyers are represented by an agent versus those that aren't?
It's a hard question to say, but I can tell you now, in the 80s and 90s, you're lucky to hear about one buyer's agents. There are so many buyer's agents there now, but I'd say about a good 30-40% of clients are seeing. I mean, I used a buyer's agent. Yeah.
Sure.
Only because I work Saturdays and I love my wife, but she was driving me crazy. And my buyer's agent actually became my avatar, and took it out to all the properties. And when it came down to do the deal, right, it was about him being present. I couldn't be there at 10 o'clock at night because sometimes these deals can happen late at night. So, when I think about it, yeah, there's a very high percentage of buyers using the services of a buyer's agent for all different sorts of reasons. You know what I mean? So there's also buyers that reckon that they're all shonking you and it doesn't make sense. But I simply ask them the question, how long have you been in the market for? 2 years. So, there is sense in using a buyer's agent. Just use the right one, that's all.
Do these associations have any sort of ethics? Like we have a code of ethics through the National Association of Realtors and our Texas Realtors and our local association. They all have these ethics.
Yeah, I think it happened very quick because the buyer's agents wasn't a big thing, 4 or 5 years ago. And now there's so many of them. I think there was some stuff that went on, and now there is. Yeah, they're being heavily processed through fair trading about ethics and procedures, and they actually have to be licensed agents. So I typically like using buyers agents who've actually been a real estate agent because they have an understanding of the selling side and the buying side. There are some agents, buyers agents, who have no experience in real estate, but they're typically very good. But that's very rare. I think the most successful buyers agents, in my opinion, are ex-real estate agents.
So they don't. So it's not like what I do, where you have an agent and they help buyers and sellers.
Well, they don't do selling. That's another thing now called seller's advocates. So if there's a little old lady who's 80 years of age and she wants to sell a property, they may use a seller's advocate where he's there and he's like the avatar for the little old lady or person, if it may be. But buyers agents stick with buyers, and their duties is buying only.
Is that by law?
I will sometimes.
Or is that just how?
That's law. Yeah, a buyer's agent can't sell property; they
Okay.
can buy property. Now you talked about sometimes you help buyers. I will help buyers. Sometimes I'll have a buyer, and I might have what we call off market. We sign a property up; they're not ready to go to market yet. They're just on our books. And sometimes I'll meet a buyer at an open inspection and say, you know what, I've got something for you, and I'll transact. Or a smart agent will look after a buyer that has something to sell. You know what I mean? So I've had a couple of buyers where I've not become a buyer's agent, but really, really help them, to try and buy a bid for that auction and help them through the buying process, building rapport, professional rapport, and I get to sell their home. That's being a smart guy, at the end of the day,
But
typically,
go ahead.
no, typically my job is listing and selling, and negotiating for the vendor.
But if you're listing a house and you find a buyer, you may sell that to them, but you're still only going to get your 1.8 to 2.2%, correct?
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah. And you're not allowed to take double commission either. So, for instance, in certain parts, I think it's in Hong Kong, where agents can take a listing fee and a buying fee. Uh, in this country, we can only take one fee. So,
Got it.
yeah, yeah, it's
You
just
can
the way
take
it
two
is.
fees here with an intermediary. I don't know the other structures that you can do it here in the US, but that is a possibility. And you know, you have to disclose the risks on for the buyers and the sellers related to doing it that way. But it is
Yeah,
different there. So that's interesting. So how do people
yeah.
find the best agent or find, uh, you know, the best property? It sounds like finding the property could be a buyer just going on to realtor.com.au or domain, and they can pretty much anybody can find a property online, maybe go to the big brokerage websites and find something. Um, so, you know, is that basically how the buyer agents are finding properties, is just going onto these websites, their personal relationships, and then the
Yeah.
value
So basically,
with
yeah.
the offers and the negotiating.
So every morning, I might have one now, maybe in the afternoon, we get an email from a buyer's agency, and they'll start giving us all the what do you call it, their list of buyer requirements. And we had a buyer's agent, usually emails in the afternoon. He'll give me a whole list of his clients that are looking to buy, and we may have something off market, or we may have something coming to market. But typically they'll scan the whole of realestate.com, domain.com, but they do send us all the time their list, because sometimes we may have a property that's going to be coming to market soon, and depending on the motivation of the vendor, we could do a deal very quickly.
Understood. And so
Mm.
how do people, what's the best way for buyers to find an agent or for sellers to find an agent? I obviously we've presented your name, your company, but just generally speaking, maybe they're in a different region where you're not the guy. What's the best way to hone in on somebody that's going to do a great job?
Look, I think referral is a big thing. I think social media is a big thing. I think making sure that you have a very good business network in terms of your, like, buyers agents will refer me, brokers, financial brokers will refer me. Um, you know, there's all these agent website, Rate My Agent, which is, a company that lists agents, and they're basically ranked on their expertise. Uh, Usually realestate.com, domain.com, a lot of people just search in that and see what, they're doing. Um, it was some time ago. I do a lot in Dover Heights, and I remember once there was a shooting. Yes, a shooting in Dover Heights. Something was going crazy, and I had the media that called me through realestate.com because I was the most active agent, to say, hey, Daniel, you wouldn't be there, would you? Just
Yeah,
can give us a report. So it made me realize that that's probably where most people look at and say, well, he's doing a lot in that area, I'll give him a call. And you're always good as your last sale. We did a big sale, Brendan and I, in Dover Heights. Typically, it was a semi 7.350. And I think we got a couple of properties after that as well, and got calls into appraisals. And once you get the appraisal, it's about managing that appraisal. Hopefully, one day you'll get it to list.
so how many homes does a buyer typically view when a buyer agent's out helping somebody? I mean, is it 4
A
or 5?
ton.
Is it
That
20,
uh,
50?
yeah, they need to go out. I mean, they go out Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. A good buyer's agent that is out there every day, if he can get, the more doors he gets in, the better for him. Yeah, or her, I should say.
So what do you think the typical number of houses are for a buyer to see before they purchase a home? Like if I'm a buyer and I'm going to go find a property in Sydney, about how many homes would I expect to look at before I find the right one?
Probably 6 to 10. Yeah, yeah,
And are there
absolutely.
more condos or single family homes, or what's the kind of property makeup?
Oh, it's a whole mix. You got investors who want to buy 1 or 2 bedroom units. Mum and dad want to buy for their daughter or son. Family home. It's just, yeah, it's usually family homes, because most people just, finding it very frustrated that homes go very quickly off market. So they want to be a part of that. That's why they get a buyer's agent, because a lot of stuff does go off market.
Do you have any idea how many agents there are in Sydney, and how many might be with your company as well?
I've got over 60 agents in our company, 60 selling out with their teams. So it's quite a lot. I think in our street, there's probably 100 agents. I think there's about 30 companies in our street. There's thousands. There's a lot of agents. Yeah.
How many people are in Sydney?
People in Sydney? Gee, that's a hard question. Couldn't tell you. I should know that, shouldn't I? I think the Sydney population, if I remember, was something that I think it's between around that 4 or 5 million. I think 3 to 4 million. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot of people, but the agents. I mean, I think there's probably over 200,000 agents just in New South Wales. It's a lot. But there's a company called REI, the Real Estate Institute of Australia. They have all these stats that are changing all the time, but we are heavily dominated with real estate agents. However, there's a big shift that's happening where real estate agents are turning into buyers agents. There's a lot of well-known listing agents have now converted to buying agents. And there's pros and cons of that as well.
I looked up online, it's 5.3 million in 2019. So very, very large city. A couple other questions, and we're getting close to wrapping this up, and it's been a good amount of time on the call with you. So thank you for that. So let me just jump back. So what is the top way a contract is ended or terminated before the sale closes in your experience?
As in the sales contract or the agency of the agent?
Would be what?
So you say the sales contract, the binds the vendor,
right, so you have
buyer,
something in a contract and it falls through. What's the top, maybe 1, 2, 3 reasons why a deal would fall through?
Rescission of contract can be 2 things. Finance, can't get their finance, can't complete. The other thing is it could be a death. It has happened to me before where there's been a rescission of a contract because a buyer, I've only seen one where a buyer actually died before settlement, and rescission of contract. But mainly it's usually because of finance, they can't complete.
One other question that was of interest to me is, if you're moving to Australia and you're moving into Sydney or other areas, are there social networks to plug into, like country clubs or other types of clubs? Like, how do people, other than, I guess, how do people meet people and get plugged into the roots of the communities there?
You just go on Facebook. Facebook have got, it is. It's, we used to have what we call the yellow pages. It was a big book. I'm sure you had it too. Yeah. It's Facebook. You just type it into Facebook. There's every organizational thing from fitness to knitting to whatever. I mean, if you have got Facebook, Instagram, you're fine.
Okay. So what about actual clubs? Are there, you use the term hoity-toity. Are there any hoity-toity clubs that people, wealthy people really want to be a part of when they move into town?
Yeah, there's a few of them. I mean, depends, if there's theatre clubs and there's nightclubs and there's the well-known bars and that sort of stuff. Also gyms, like they're down at the stadium on Moore Park. It's a fitness gym, but I think a lot of the super rich go there because they like to go there and they all interact and talk, and they do work out. But there's certain areas that, when you're in Sydney, there's certain niche places where what we call the high-end people hang out. So it's usually the gyms, I find, at the moment. Yeah. And obviously I think there's golf clubs. I mean, a lot of people love the golf. We've got Sydney Golf Club in Rose Bay, and I mean, that's the elite.
Those include tennis as well, I assume.
Sorry?
Tennis. Those include tennis, the golf clubs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Are
Yeah.
there beach clubs?
And then um, not really. They tried to make an Amalfi Beach Club at Bondi Beach, but the community didn't want it because they said there's enough segregation, which I actually kind of agreed with. Bondi Beach should be for everyone. I don't think it should be sectioned off, for the elite.
Are there yacht
But
clubs?
that's my personal. Oh, there's a ton of yacht clubs. Yeah,
Yacht clubs.
yeah,
Is that a big thing there, voting?
yeah, yeah. I think so. Yep, we've got some nice boats there.
About how many
The
brokerages? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying that the owner of Double Bay office, Bill Murphy, he's one of the owners of Highland Double Bay. I think his cousin runs a very big boating business, and this is the new thing that agents are getting into now. Not us at the moment, but I'm sure that David Highland will look at it. He's seeing real estate companies now actually using our process in the way that we do real estate, is auctioning off boats, buyers agents for boats. Yeah, so it's starting to become a thing. Yeah.
Do you know how many big brokerages are in the city, do you think? I mean, you said thousands of realtors, so I'm assuming there's hundreds of brokerages.
There's hundreds in the city. I mean, in Chinatown, there's a lot of Chinese agents for their community. You got the big commercial boys like Colliers, CBRE, Robot Commercial. There's some really big branded, and those guys do the big stuff. I'm talking big hotels, big buildings. That's a different world. Commercial industrial real estate, a completely different world. That they can do deals from 200 million to 5 million. I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman from Colliers. He was in commercial, and some of the sales that these guys do are just unbelievable. Doing a deal for 200 million, 100 million, 60 million. It's quite amazing stuff. And the CBD is pretty full on. And in actual fact, I was speaking to a commercial agent, and we're actually doing hopefully we're doing a commercial deal together in the order of around 30 million. And I said, how many buyers do you actually talk to? He goes, Dan, there's only 200 buyers, which is just insane. I actually thought they had thousands, but they have typically 200 buyers. They're always transacting in commercial. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Yep. So how do you, just very short order, how do you get an agent license and a broker's license? Is it, time consuming? Is it really, really hard?
It's hard. Yeah, they've made it hard. Look, when I did my license, it was embarrassing because I went to tech for 3 years. But now it's more like a diploma course. My wife just completed the course. Took her a good 3 years to do it. Plus, you need at least 12 months of experience. They're not making it easy. It's not easy to become an agent, which I think is great because a very well-known influencer in real estate, Tom Panos, I don't know if you heard of him. He said that many years ago, if you just stood vertical and had a heartbeat, you were an agent. Well, that's changed. You pretty much have to work for 3 years, doing all the work, and then obviously you've got to do practical as well. Plus, every year you have to do your CPD, which is your ongoing learning, and you have to complete that. And there's a lot of subjects you have to cover off every year.
So can anybody become a broker, and is that even harder?
You've got to have a clean, you've got to have a clean name. You can't be a bankrupt. You can't have any, I suppose you can't have a criminal history. So yeah, you've got to be really, clean skin. Absolutely. So no, anybody can apply for it, but they really want to. They're changing this industry. They're making it more professional, and we're hoping to see better agents out there as well.
So there's an extra, not only more requirements on the clean name, but more education requirements to get a broker's license versus an agent's license.
Yeah, absolutely. And the CPD is a compulsory thing. You have to do it,
Understood.
And if you don't do it, you can lose your license. Yeah. Or they can suspend your license. Yeah.
All right. As we wrap up here, Are there any memorable client experiences, really good or really bad, that you'd like to share?
I suppose that, residential real estate, you never know what you're going to get. You know what I mean? I suppose many years ago, I was a day out of my agency. Well, just a day before my agency was going to end. And look, the vendor was really cool with me. She know I tried. And look, some things just don't sell. And I had a phone call from a lady who said to me she wanted to look at this home, and she said, "Do you mind if I bring my cats?" And I went, "Oh God," So I rang my vendor, and she said, "Daniel, are you serious?" I said, "Look, I've got nothing to lose." And fair enough, she came along with her cats, two cats. And I felt really embarrassed, and I thought, this is not going to happen. I said, and my vendor, I said to him, "You're better off just go, because I know you're going to stab me, and I know that you're about to lose it." And she was actually getting really upset with me then. And I brought this lady through, and she basically said to me, "If my cats lay on the ground, I'll buy the home." And they did. The cats actually walked around, laid on the home. She goes, "I'll buy it." And it was at list price. But here's the thing. Most agents would have told to go, and you just never know. So when I rang the lawyer and I said, and all he said to me, "Daniel, did the cats lay down?" I said, "Yeah, they did." He said, "Good, we got a deal." And that day we actually exchanged contracts. So that's always been in my head.
Good one.
This in residential, you're dealing with the public, and no one is normal. I can tell you now. You just got to have patience. You have your dark days in real estate, and you have your happy days. That was a really dark day, and it ended up being pretty cool after that. So
That's a
anyway,
cool story. So
yeah,
thank you so much for the time. I think we've covered a lot of territory and have given people a really good grasp of what it's like to buy and sell real estate in Australia and in Sydney, and what it is like to be an agent, and the requirements, and how to find one, and how to work with one, and et cetera. I guess my last question is, how can buyers and sellers reach you? And then we can conclude.
yeah. Well, so basically, it's just simply they can email me, they can phone me. But I'm on the Highland website, and really you just got to click on Daniel Baran, and all my details are there. I always say I'm 24/7. I'm like a doctor. You know, call me, email me, and I'm here for you. And I do deal with a lot of guys from your area, and I deal with a lot of guys internationally. Sometimes they're at the wrong time, but at the end of the day, I'm there, happy to take a call or an email.
Well, it has been an awesome time together. I really hope I have an opportunity to meet you and visit Sydney. We'll see what
Yeah,
the next couple of years. Got to plan these things out a little bit. And feel free, of course, to reach out if you're going to visit Austin, Texas. I'd love to host you here and introduce you to people and show you how we do things here.
yeah, same here. And actually, if you do come to Australia, we'll have to do the bridge climb together. Feel like that.
And what's that? The bridge climb.
We actually are walking on the bridge from one end to the
The
other.
bridge.
The bridge, yeah. I had a lady from America. She was 85 years of age. We pushed her up there. She loved it. So
This is the bridge
yeah,
behind
there's
me
no excuse. Yes, yes,
in the picture.
yeah,
Okay. I did not know that
yeah,
was a thing. So that I will definitely put that on my to-do list.
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Let's sign off. Have a great day. It's kind of our
Same
evening.
to you.
I'm gonna go to dinner. Talk to you later.
Okay. All the best. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.